Hi, I'm Dr. Walter Matwichuk, and I'm here to introduce the latest iteration of my self-help sheet. When I was a kid, we used to connect the dots when we were crayoning or drawing pictures. And what I've done is revise my self-help sheet such that people can follow the numbers through the A, B, C, D, E, F process and engage in effective self-help using REBT principles reasonably effectively, and they can do it, I think, with the guidance that this worksheet provides. Now, what I want to do is share my screen and show you some of the changes. What we need to do when we use a self-help sheet is to identify those instances when we're upset. And so that's pretty easy to do, but sometimes we also will observe ourselves engaging in self-defeating behavior. So the first step is to briefly delineate, describe what the adversity is, the negative state of affairs to which you're having some sort of reaction to. Now, what's really important is that you go to step 2 and identify what we call the critical inference. It's a hunch. It's the thing that you're most distressed about. So, for example, in the case of anxiety, we may make the hunch that we're going to do poorly at a future job interview, or we may have the hunch that we're going to get rejected if we try to invoke a person and ask them to to go out with us. Now, you specify what the critical inference is. That's very important because the critical inference will help you specify what your basic attitude is later on in the process. The next step, the third step, is to identify your unhealthy feelings. Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling depressed? Are you feeling angry? And you could either identify the urges that go along with those unhealthy feelings, those self-defeating feelings, or the actual behaviors that you engage in. So very often when we're anxious, we withdraw or we avoid. When we're angry, we may be aggressive. Now you go into step 4 and you give thought to what would be the healthy alternative feeling, the healthy negative feeling in the context of the critical inference that you're making. So, for example, if you think you may do poorly on a future job interview, a healthy negative feeling would be concern. If, for example, you expect to get rejected, a healthy negative feeling would be concern. If you have been rejected, then the healthy negative feeling would be disappointment or sadness. If you're angry, the healthy negative feeling would be annoyance. So the fourth step in doing this self-therapy is to get an idea of what the healthy negative alternative feeling would look like. And you could also specify what the healthy negative, the healthy constructive behavior that would go along with your healthy feeling. So for example, if you're concerned about failure on a job interview, the smart thing to do would be to rehearse your possible answers to questions that may be asked of you. If you're a healthy behavior is one that helps you change what you can change when it comes to the adversity. So you want to give some thought to what the healthy emotional response would look like, okay? The next step, the fifth step, is to specify the healthy component of your basic attitude. So in REBT, we argue that people's preferences, people's wishes, their desires are always healthy, except in the case if you have like an antisocial preference. But let's assume that you're not interested in robbing a bank or anything like that, that what you want to do is succeed, say, in a job interview. The healthy component would be, I want to do well on the job interview. A healthy component for a dating situation would be, I want this person to accept my overture for a date. Now, the healthy component is only part of your basic attitude. What people do, according to REBT theory, is escalate or rigify that healthy, flexible desire. So they go from saying, I want to do well to I must do well. And so you would put I must do well here in step 5, 5B. So the full basic attitude would be I want to do well, and that but and I have to do well. And that's the attitude that you're going to target for your disputing process, which is step 6. Step 6 is the process of stepping back once you've identified your self-defeating, rigid, or extreme attitude that you identified in step 5, and question it, evaluate whether it is functional. So what I've listed is 5 different paths of questioning. Now, you don't have to use all 5. You use the one that makes sense to you. Now, you could use more than one. So usually the easiest dispute is a functional dispute where you say, well, when I tell myself I want to do well and I absolutely have to, how does my rigid attitude impact my ability to function? Is the impact healthy and positive or negative and self-defeating? And the answer to that question would be, well, when I tell myself I want to do well and have to, I'm going to be anxious and I'm going to feel the urge to avoid either preparation or I'm going to over prepare. So from a functional standpoint, I want to do well and have to is going to make me anxious. Now, you could also look at the question of looking at the evidence. In this line of attack, you ask the question, is there evidence that supports my rigid and extreme attitude? Is there evidence? Now, when at first blush, you may think there is evidence, but when there's a rigid attitude, you're going to find that there isn't evidence that supports it. So the evidence that stands generally supports your preference. I want to do well has evidence that lies within your value system, your heart. But the idea that you have to do well, you absolutely have to do well and get whatever it is that you're going after does not have evidence. There's no evidence to support that part of it. So the attitude is therefore false. It's unsupported. Now, another line of attack that resonates with people is would I teach a child who's having some emotional problems to think the way I'm thinking in this particular situation? And the answer is surely no. I would not teach a child to tell themselves that they have to perform perfectly well and succeed. I would teach them to try hard, to have the preference to want to do well and to have the goal of excellence, but to avoid crossing that line into I want to do well and I have to. That's where a child would make themselves anxious. So you could, in fact, do that dispute. The logical dispute is a dispute where you show yourself that there's a disconnect between the premise and the conclusion. So in this case, you start with the premise, I want to do well, and then you conclude, and therefore I have to. That's a logical disconnect. It doesn't follow that because you want to do well, you have to do well. So the logical dispute is where you sit down and you look for that non sequitur, that place where you go from a preference to a demand and you make that jump. The metaphorical dispute is generally one where you think about some wisdom that may be inherent in a Aesop fable or in a story that you may have heard or a parable. And very often the metaphorical dispute is one that takes aim at the unhealthy attitude. It's probably the hardest dispute to use, and it's generally things that a therapist will use when they're working with a patient. So I wouldn't focus too much on metaphorical disputes. But like, for example, if you say to yourself, I have to do this homework assignment quickly, You could then think about how there's an Aesop's fable that shows that the slow but steady way is the way that you win the race. And there's an Aesop's fable that shows that the tortoise ends up racing a hare, and the tortoise wins because the hare goes real fast, but then takes a nap, and the tortoise just plugs along at the race, and then ultimately crosses the finish line first. So that would be an example of of an Aesop's fable that shows you that you may want to do your homework quickly, but it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that you master your homework quickly. Now, the seventh step in this self-help process is to create an effective new dispute, a new effective new philosophy, effective new attitude. And here, what you're doing is you've been through identifying your unhealthy attitude. You know the healthy feelings and behavior that you want to engage, you want to ultimately adopt towards whatever adversity you're facing, and you've already criticized your attitude. Now what you're looking to do is create an alternative one that you could practice. So according to REBT theory, your effective new philosophy will have a flexible component followed by a negation of the demand. So using the example that I've been using so far, you would retain the healthy component of I want to do well in the job interview. But here, because you see that attitude doesn't, that the demand doesn't help you function and there's no evidence to support it, instead of saying, I want to do well and have to, you say, I want to do well on the job interview, but don't have to do so. I'll try my best. I accept that even if I try my best, I may not do perfectly well. And so therefore, I'm not going to tell myself I have to do perfectly well and thereby make myself anxious. If you're thinking about asking someone out for a date, you may say something like to yourself, I want to be accepted by this person, but I don't have to be. And I will make my request for a time to meet with them, but they don't have to accept it. So the effective new philosophy has a flexible component followed by a negation of demand. Now, I haven't talked about the derivative attitudes in REBT. What we argue is that there are non-extreme derivative attitudes that you very often want to hold that follow from your flexible flexible attitude. So, for example, if you said, I want to do well during my job interview, but I don't have to. And if I do poorly, that's unfortunate, but it's not the end of the world. That would be an example of a non-extreme attitude. You could have a different non-extreme attitude like, I want to do well in my job interview, but I don't have to. And if I make a mistake and ends up costing me the interview, that'll be hard to bear, but not unbearable. So you would have high tolerance for not getting what you want. And then the third extreme attitude that would be sensible is to say, I want to do well in the job interview, but I don't have to. And if I do poorly, that would show that I'm a fallible human, and that poor performance would be one of many performances that I give over a lifetime, but it wouldn't speak for the whole of my existence, and my essence would not be rateable. I would remain a fallible human who did this job interview poorly, but it wouldn't make me a failure, and I could learn from the experience. Now, the eighth step is that you would want to write down or specify any functional behavior that would go along with this new attitude. So, for example, if you were thinking about interviewing, you would write as a functional new behavior in step 8, I will solicit job interviews. If, in fact, you want to ask someone out for a date, you would write, I'll take the plunge and ask someone out for a date. So the functional new behavior is a behavior that goes along with your effective new philosophy that you identified in step 7. Now, step 9 is where you revisit the effective new philosophy and you ask yourself, yeah, it sounds good, but do I have any doubts, reservations, and objections? And if I do have them, what are they? And thereby you revisit, you try to reduce any resistance you may have to adopting the effective new philosophy, and more importantly, acting in a way that's consistent with it. And this might mean thinking some more about how the unhealthy alternative attitude is going to really lead you to self-defeating behavior. You may revisit the evidence that disconfirms that you have to get what you want, that you have to be accepted by people, that the people you love have to love you back. So you may revisit the evidence that refutes your rigid attitude. You may look at evidence that supports the new attitude that, yes, I want a particular person to love me, but they don't have to. I want the job interviewer to hire me, but they don't have to do so. So you would resolve any doubts, reservations, and objections you would have to the effective new philosophy. And that's what's represented here in step 9. And then finally, what we want you to do is to think about what it would mean to do homework that would follow from this exercise in self-therapy. Would it mean telling yourself every morning that you want the love and approval of significant others but don't need it? Would it mean forcing yourself to spend a certain amount of time every day looking for jobs and filling out job applications? So the homework that would follow, the actions that you would take in step 10 would be for you to specify what it would mean for you to implement this philosophy, what it would mean to strengthen it. One homework assignment might be just to listen to this video again so that you better understand how to complete this form. I'm telling you, connect the dots. I write at the top here, trust the process. Follow the steps 1 through 10. Take your best guess at what would go in each one of these 1 through 10 categories, and then fill out the sheet. And what you will learn if you do this regularly when you're upset or when you're engaging in self-defeating behavior, what you will find is that you begin to really make strides in helping yourself. REBT is a therapy of self-help. It's a philosophy of self-help. And we want you to spend time working on your own self-defeating emotions and self-defeating behaviors. I really have seen people grow and flourish and overcome emotional and behavioral problems using REBT, and I've helped them to use it. But you don't have to be in therapy with me in order to do self-therapy, and that's what we're trying to do. We're really trying to give you something that you can use with yourself. As the old adage goes, it's better to teach a person to fish than give them a fish dinner. And that's what we're trying to do in REBT. I would also encourage you to attend my weekly free demonstrations every Saturday at 9 a.m. on Zoom, every Saturday, 9 a.m. Eastern. And you can watch me talk to a volunteer where I show them how to use this process of self-help. And I go through I actually go through these steps, and I then give them that sheet. I email it to them because it's virtual. But what you find if you watch my Saturday demonstrations is that you learn how to apply REBT to your problems. So you can write to me at rebtdoctor@gmail.com to get the link. It's free to attend, And I hope you join us. But more importantly, I hope you learn to use my 1 through 10 connect the dots, if you will, self help sheet.